The road to hell is paved with adverbs. So this is a quote from Stephen King, a famous fiction writer, in his book on writing. I love this book, but I think what's really interesting about it is how this lesson about adverbs, his hatred of adverbs, can actually be useful when thinking about how we use them in academic work. So here are some adverbs that are really problematic in students' work. The intensifiers, so they increase the intensity of that verb or adjective. This was a very serious issue. Scholars are increasingly discussing this issue. Those intensifiers are problematic because they tend to give a false sense of profundity to the work. The student is trying to make their essay seem academic and important, and throwing in these intensifiers often is a good way of doing that, but it doesn't really actually add anything to your argument. What is the difference between an extremely important issue and an important issue? If you don't make that qualitative distinction, then there's really no point in telling us. The conjunctive adverbs are a little different, so their job is to join two independent clauses. The trouble is, students are now peppering their essays with these. I see therefores and howevers and moreovers and converselys, and therefore is the biggest culprit here. Students love to use therefore. Again, the trouble that comes from these is that they don't actually add anything to your argument, and if they're not conjoining two clauses and they're not used sparingly, they become really, really tiresome. And I have spent a lot of time in marking just crossing out therefores and the howevers and the subsequentlys and the moreovers. So here's a sentence that has got 4 adverbs in, and there are a couple I'd like to get rid of. Scholars are increasingly discussing the undeniably important topic of cheese rolling, while subsequently forgetting the equally important pastime of tar barrelling. If you don't know what cheese rolling or tar barrelling are, I suggest you look them up. They are great English pastimes. But increasingly discussing. So do we need that increasingly? I don't really think we do. I don't think the focus of this sentence is the increasing discussion on the topic of cheese rolling. It's actually the tar barrelling that I'm trying to get people to think about here. So I'm going to remove increasingly. What about undeniably? So discussing the undeniably important topic of cheese rolling. Well, this is me trying to convince the reader that this is something that's worth their time and it's undeniably important. I think the reader should be allowed to make that decision for themselves. So I'm going to remove that one. Then it is the important topic of cheese rolling while subsequently forgetting. So subsequently there is implying that they're discussing the topic and then they are moving on to forget the equally important pastime of tar barrelling. It's not really what I mean. What I mean is that they're forgetting talking about tar barrelling while they're discussing cheese rolling. So actually that adverb is doing no work there. If anything, it's making the sentence less clear. So let's get rid of that one. Now, what about equally? Well, equally is really the only one that I want to keep in this sentence. Equally tells the reader something they didn't know before. It tells them that I think this pastime of tar barrelling is equally as important as cheese rolling, and it's a shame that scholars aren't discussing it, so we're going to keep that one in. So there's one more I'd like to show you. This one comes from an essay I wrote as an undergraduate. It's this sentence here. In rural areas, residents who were financially poor were seen to be living a simpler, happier life without the material trappings associated with urbanism. Now, there's lots of problems with this sentence, but let's just focus on the adverb. Financially poor. That is a waste of an adverb. If we say that someone is poor, we usually imply that to mean financially poor. We don't need to say they were financially poor. That is what we call a tautology. It's like saying an ATM machine, an automated transaction machine. So in that instance, that adverb is doing no work and it can go. So in your own work, have a look at the adverbs you're using. Have you got a load of therefores and howevers and moreovers that are just peppering the essay? If so, consider removing some of them. Save yourself the words. And have you got adverbs that are actually telling the reader something they didn't know before? If the adverb isn't doing that, consider removing it there as well. I'm Dr. Joe Thorogood. This is Remarkable. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.